Hello from me, Lazar. We continue with the lessons from the course on CSS. In the previous lesson, we started the second chapter, Types of Selectors in CSS, and now we will continue with the second lesson on this topic. Next are the compound selectors. These are selectors that are made up of two or more elements, with no separator between them. Here's the syntax. In simple terms, with this rule both elements must be present. For the rule to be valid, I've given an example, so I won't go into detail. The next interesting selectors are combined selectors. Unlike the previous ones, in these there is a separator between the elements, and depending on this separator, they are divided into four types depending on the separator. These separators are also called combinators. They indicate and clarify the relationships between the individual elements. These separators are space, this greater than sign, the plus sign, and the tilde sign. So, now, to better understand the relationship between the elements we need to go back to the document tree, which elements were siblings, which is the root element, which were children, and so on. We won't go back and examine them in detail now. So, we start with the first separator, this greater than sign. It indicates that all elements of type element 2 are selected, whose parent element is element 1. But only the nested directly. The next divisor is the interval. It is also very close and similar to the previous one, but applies to all nested elements of this type. That is, the interval is about all levels of nesting, even at much lower levels, while the front separator is about only directly nested elements. So, if we have a div and in it a paragraph p, and if for example we have a second div and in it a paragraph p, it will not apply to it. And then the spacing will apply. The plus separator is used to select sibling elements. The tilde separator is similar, but it selects only elements that are at the same level. That is, the difference between them is subtle. Pseudo-classes. A pseudo-class in CSS is a keyword, a function word, which is added at the end of the selector and is used to apply a given style to a given element, but only when it is located in a certain state. Pseudo-classes are usually related to the dynamic state of a given element, when a certain event occurs, or to the position of the element relative to other elements in the document tree. Unlike the classes that which we ourselves define a name for, here only certain key, official words are used, so far about 30 in number, which are used for certain cases. They start with a colon and are usually placed after the tag selector, without a space. They can also be used with the class selector. Their syntax is as follows. So, here, for example, these are used for hyperlinks, if we want, for example, to change the default colors. We continue with pseudo-classes for child elements. These are pseudo-classes that set the style of a given element, depending on its location in the document tree and in relation to other elements. To better illustrate them, I've shown a general example in which I specify two blocks, one with 4 paragraphs and the other with 3 and 1 span element. I won't show this example in detail now, but there are a few interesting pseudo-classes here. The first one is first child, that is, when the first element in the list is selected. Here's what happens if you use it. The second one is last child, it selects the last element in the list, in this case just because there's a span here. Analogous and similar are last of type, that is, the last of this type, then the styles will apply to the third paragraph. And first of type, the styles will apply to the first paragraph. One of the most interesting pseudo-classes we have is the nth child pseudo-class, which styles the nth elements of all elements with a common parent in the document tree. This is a very interesting and unusual pseudo-class, which can be used to make several lessons. The selection is made here, according to the ordinal number of the element, and the selection criterion is set in brackets, for one of the following values, all even elements, all odd elements, a number that matches the element with this sequential number and formula. The most interesting thing, the formula n plus b, that is, selecting all elements that correspond to the result of the formula. It represents a loop in which a, n, b, are integers. The number a is the size of the cycle, starting at 0. And c for starting at 0, b is an offset. If a or b are 0, they are not written. An expression is written without the one of them, which is 0. You can also use negative values, but the result won't always make sense. We will note that this selector is very interesting. Here we examined examples with it. There are situations when its use can to save a lot of writing. I won't go into detail about it now, because it would be too long. Here I have described the formula in detail, a very interesting situation, what happens in each row of the loop, so you can review the PDF file in more detail. Other commonly used pseudo-classes. Some authors divide them into 4 or 5 groups, but I'll just present them together. I've presented some of the others here. The non-pseudo class, which sets the style of all other elements, except the one specified. The focus pseudo class, which sets the style. Of the focused element. Here the pseudo-class check sets a style for the element that is selected, works with checkbox, radio, or option. That's it for pseudo-classes in a nutshell. And the last point here is, pseudo-elements. A pseudo-element in CSS is a keyword, a function word, which is added at the end of the selector and the case for setting a style in two cases. First, for a virtual element, which does not actually exist in the document tree, and secondly, for part of an element. Pseudo-elements when they were first released started out just like pseudo-classes with a colon, but then they changed it, to differentiate themselves. And now in CSS 3 they start with 2 colons. They are usually placed after the selector for a tag or element, without a space. They can also be used for class selectors. So, for those that serve to style a virtual element, the elements before and after are used, that is, before and after the element. Before sets a style for inserting content before the specified element, and after the specified element. Now, if we want to insert into our list here of the 3 Christian virtues, faith, hope and love, which are the main Christian virtues, and we want to insert an orthodox cross before that, we will use before, this option, and you see an orthodox cross we have before each element. And if we want to be after them, then we use after and the orthodox cross appears after them. And as for pseudo-elements for styling per part of an element, we will consider 2, first letter and first line, which are used for elements containing text, and serve to style part of it. Their names tell you what they're used for. First letter styles the first letter of a given text, usually found in a paragraph, and first line styles the first line of a given text, usually found in a paragraph. I've given an example here. Here's for the first letter, if we need to change its style. And here's for a different style for the first line. That's all for this lesson and this topic. Best regards.